What is spatial audio? And is it a fad or the future for audio drama? These are the first questions in this new series. Bryan Lincoln Audio explores spatial audio. Side note, video editing skills are a work in progress. Hi, I'm Bryan Lincoln. Today I'm going to talk about audio formats, where spatial audio fits into the big picture, and then ask, is it really worth all the extra effort? Let's start by reviewing the history of audio formats. This is a phonograph, which appeared in the late 1800s. Notice the single horn. This is the birth of recordable and playable sound. There was a steady development of speaker technology over the next half-century, but a simple one-speaker system lasted through to the record players of the 1950s. Stereo, or the use of two speakers, was invented in the 1930s, but it didn't make it into consumer technology until around 1958. The music industry had to push this new tech with demonstration records, and stereo became the standard by the late 1960s. Note that it took some convincing for people to realize the difference and adopt the newer technology, even though it was a clear improvement having different sounds playing from two separate speakers. It allowed for sounds to be separated in space and feel more realistic and immersive. And it also allows panning or moving an individual sound from left to right within the overall mix. While two speakers sound more immersive than one, as you can imagine, four would sound more immersive than two. So the next step was to try surround sound. Quadraphonic sound was first available in 1969, but a specific player called a Quad 8 was required and never really caught on with the public. The improvement really wasn't worth the extra hassle when it came to music. Stereo seemed to be the end game for the music industry. But we know surround sound did take off eventually, but it would be thanks to movies, not music. VHS tapes were invented in 1977, but it wasn't until Laserdiscs in 1983 that there was enough storage space for extra audio channels. This led to Dolby Surround, or 5.1, which refers to 5 speakers, usually 3 front speakers and 2 rear speakers, plus an LFE, or low-frequency effects speaker for deep bass sounds. The DVD arrived in 1995 and was another giant leap in storage. In 1999, 6.1 was introduced, but never really caught on. Apparently, the difference with an extra rear speaker didn't entice enough people to upgrade from 5.1. In 2006, Blu-ray came out, and with it 7.1 surround, which is basically 5.1 with 2 extra side speakers added. And this is still a standard surround setup 20 years later. Each of these bigger sound systems allowed for sounds to come from more places around you, resulting in a more immersive experience. And instead of the simple left-right pan you got from stereo, we've now added a second dimension allowing for front-to-back panning. The requirement, of course, is to invest in a bunch of speakers and set them up in specific positions. Before I get into what I call spatial audio, I want to bring us back to the idea of audio drama, because that's what this series is about. While film has really pushed the surround sound technology into homes, and it makes sense, you have a screen to sit in front of so you know exactly where the speaker should go, music is still mostly mixed in stereo. Why? Well, it's how we choose to experience music. In most cases, the convenience of a more mobile system, be it headphones or a boombox you walk around with, is more important than the more immersive format. But audio drama is in this weird middle place because the mixing process is much more like film, with ambience, Foley and sound effects, dialogue, and music all mixed together. But without a screen to sit in front of, it's more likely that you'll want to listen to it out in a car or on headphones. This is why most audio drama is still released in stereo. While surround is possible and can sound better, the creator has to decide if remixing into each of these formats is worth the effort, and it usually isn't. And so, if Dolby Atmos, the spatial audio format that I use, was as simple as adding 4 ceiling speakers to get to, say, 7.1.4 to allow us to pan in the third spatial dimension, then we would be excited about that for movies, but not very interested for music or audio drama. And that would be the end of my video series because the answer would be no. Spatial audio drama would sound cool, but so few people have a 12 or more speaker system at home that you'd be better off sticking to stereo. But spatial audio is so much more than just adding a height direction. And this is one of the main reasons I'm making these videos. Most people assume that it's just the next step in surround sound. You have how many speakers? That's cool, I guess. I wouldn't have built a 7.1.4 mixing room to make audio drama if that was all it was. It does do the surround, and really well, but it's also something else entirely. Spatial audio is a new way to think about mixing. Instead of sending each track to a specific speaker, it involves creating objects and placing them anywhere in the room. And these objects can move around. The playback in my mixing room will come out of my 7.1.4 system, but the Atmos file itself is made up of all these objects, not just my 12 speaker channels, like in a surround mix. And there can be up to 118 objects at any time in Dolby Atmos, so plenty of flexibility. Now, this makes for some big Atmos files. My 28-minute pilot is about 20.5 gigabytes in size. But think of this as the uncompressed master file for the audio drama you're making. Now, remember where I talked about stereo versus surround? Won't the audience listen on headphones anyway? Don't I still have to go make a stereo mix for them too? After all, they won't have all those speakers. What's the point of having 118 objects floating around if it's going down to 2 speakers, right? But the answer is no, you don't have to go make a separate stereo mix. You basically already did it. In Dolby Atmos, they're called re-renders. I can make my master Atmos file and render out whichever formats I want. Stereo, 5.1, 7.1. There's a long list of possibilities. But it's a top-down approach. You mix based on the objects, and you can have an end goal of any or all of these formats. And yes, you'll have the best spatial experience listening in a full room with all of the speakers, but you can still get a great mix in any of the other formats. But headphones are a special case, and they require a little bit more explanation. I've kind of glossed over it so far. This will have to be another video, but to summarize here, the best headphone mix of a spatial audio drama won't be a basic stereo file, but rather something called a binaural mix. If a sound comes from somewhere in the room, it won't reach each of your ears at the same time. And your brain is very good at pinpointing location of a nearby sound based on this timing. In this way, a binaural mix can make objects sound like they move in a circle around you, not just left or right, like a standard stereo panning. A binaural mix can be a really immersive experience and stands out against a stereo mixed audio drama. It just feels more immersive. It feels like sources are coming from all around you, and you just cannot replicate that in a purely stereo mix. In my opinion, this is already a reason to consider mixing this way. Yes, there's a cost to set the room up to be able to mix this way, but once you do, you can mix in a fully spatial format and still output a stereo or binaural version of that mix. That'll sound great in headphones. So if we were to just freeze time now and look at the way things are now, then it would be a question of, is it worth building a studio that costs well into 5 figures to put together in order to be able to output all these formats of each show that you do without a bunch of extra work? And that would be a case-by-case basis. And I think a lot of people would still choose, well, I can just do stereo because there's still not enough audience to justify a one-time cost, even though I don't have the time cost of every episode being done all these different ways. But that's only considering this moment right now, 2024. Let's consider the future. There's 2 main things that I think of as issues going forward that really lean me towards spatial audio as something that's important to get into now rather than later. 1, headphones are being developed specifically for spatial audio, including head tracking, and they're only going to get better. As it becomes more mainstream that people have these fancier kinds of headphones, they're going to be looking for material to play on them that sounds good. It's no longer a choice between a surround sound experience or headphones. Number 2, cars. Some cars have started adding Dolby Atmos sound systems. Right now, you're going to find that in the newer, more expensive cars. But how long before it becomes standard in cars? At some point, the technology is going to be such that everyone has a Dolby Atmos system. It's just sitting in your driveway and you're getting in there every day. So that's a projection. We don't know that that happens. There's going to be competition driving this, but there's a huge incentive for this to take place. My instincts scream at me to say that in the future, audio dramas that were not mixed spatially will become obsolete. I think the demand and requirement will be to mix spatially. Just look at the history. Mono to stereo took some time to take hold, but stereo became the new standard. Since then, stereo hung around as the preferred format because of the trade-off between immersion and a loss of convenience. But spatial audio breaks that inverse relationship. It took over 30 years from the invention of stereo to it becoming a standard over mono. Change happens way faster these days, and I don't think it'll be long before we're looking back at a pre- versus post-spatial audio world. And I think audio drama specifically is set up to be in a really good place. It was kind of caught in this weird in-between in a pre-spatial audio world. It benefits from surround, but if you have to sit in a theater to listen, you might as well have something on the screen. In breaking free from the limitations of stereo for an audio-only experience, we don't need a screen. In fact, a screen forces a majority of the action to be in front of you. Audio drama exists in your mind, and action doesn't need to have a preferred direction. As a result, spatial audio drama should pave the way in terms of innovation and creativity in storytelling. And I can't wait to hear what people do with it. That being said, thank you very much. I'm Bryan Lincoln. Happy mixing.